We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be a part of our thought leadership platform. And we started this series so that we could continue to be an educational resource for the marketplace on a number of different topics. And during this unprecedented time, we thought this was a great forum for us to share a perspective on what has really become one of the most talked about topics in the data and targeting conversation. So an overview of what we're going to talk about today really quickly. We're going to have a guided discussion among our esteemed panel, whom's going to introduce themselves in a moment. We'll talk about the history of ACR, what it is, where it's going, and how advertisers can use this powerful data to enhance their digital advertising efforts. Along the way, we're also going to include some interactive polling questions for the audience, as well as an opportunity for a Q&A at the end of the discussion as well. So the first thing I want to do is introduce our panelists for today. So I'm going to start to the upper left of the screen here. We have Christopher Dexheimer here, and he's going to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Dexheimer. Most people call me Dex. I'm on the consumer marketing team for HBO, focusing on audience development. So basically going from audience targeting, from strategy to activation across the various lines of business at HBO, be it tune-in, brand, acquisition. I started on the HBO Now acquisition team shortly after launch 4 years ago, and we have kind of transitioned the team to more of a data-focused team, and we're helping to lead that from an audience perspective.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'll pass it over to you, Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Ingenito. Thanks for having me. I'm a digital media director at Horizon Media. I've been there almost 6 years, and throughout my career, I've specialized in the entertainment vertical. I work primarily on tune-in campaigns, so driving linear viewership for my clients, and I've been using ACR data for several years, both for audience targeting and attribution.
Great, thank you. Ronan, you're up.
Ronan Higgins, TV AdSync, not on mute, CEO and co-founder. TV AdSync is one of the leading aggregators of ACR television viewing data in the US market. We work with 2 of the 3 top smart TV brands, helping advertisers and agencies, including Alex, target and attribute TV viewing behaviors and TV ad exposure.
Great, thank you, Ronan. And our final panelist is Ken. Why don't you jump in?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here virtually. That is, so excited today to talk about ACR. My name is Ken Norcross. I am the Director of Business Development at Inscape. Inscape is the leading provider of ACR data to the US market, and we are a wholly owned subsidiary of Vizio. So we are providing the largest single source of data set today, and happy to chat more about that.
Great, thanks so much, guys. We appreciate it, and we're looking forward to hearing all of your perspectives today. The first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to open up with a poll question to get things started. So the poll is going to pop up on your screen, and it is: do you currently leverage ACR data for your brands? Just a quick yes or no question.
I get to answer that as well. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, we'll give it a few seconds to populate here.
We need a Wheel of Fortune sound.
No, look at that.
Rob, you're obviously seeing the results.
I'm seeing the results. Great. I think we have a quorum here. I mean, this is great. Obviously, there's a lot of you that are familiar with the data set, and then there's a good amount, over 30%, that are not. So this is going to be a great discussion. So why don't we start by setting the stage, since there's 30% of you guys on the call that don't currently leverage ACR data. Ronan, why don't you give us a little overview of ACR, what it is, what it stands for, and how that type of data is typically collected?
Sure. For the 69% who are already using it, you'll have to bear with me for a second. ACR stands for Automated Content Recognition, or sometimes Automatic Content Recognition. It's basically an overarching term for technologies that can recognize content. There's different flavors. There's audio content recognition, which uses audio, and there's video recognition as well. It's been deployed in market for over 7 years. If anybody's familiar with the Shazam app, that's basically a music recognition app that uses an audio flavor of content recognition, the content being music, obviously. But in the last 5 years, video recognition has really come into its own. Originally used for monitoring broadcasts, television broadcasts, to identify certain cut sequences of video, but more recently integrated into consumer electronic devices, smart televisions in particular, Vizio in particular, where it basically is able to recognize what people are watching on television, what TV ads they're being exposed to, what their behaviors are. And that's kind of a very top level view on ACR.
Great. Ken, is there anything you want to add to that?
I think that's a good top level view. To Ronan's point, there are different flavors of ACR, so not all ACR is created equally, but it tends to get lumped into the same bucket. So for instance, audio versus video, and then even within video, there are different forms of technology that are out there.
Yeah. Ken, do you want to touch a little bit on the audio versus video thing so that everyone in the audience understands what you mean by that?
Yeah. So from Inkscape perspective, we actually leverage both technologies, but primarily on the video front. So the video front is just looking at what's on the screen and comparing that to a database of known content. So similar to Ronan's example, where Shazam, it's listening for a sound fingerprint and then comparing that to a database to provide you with the metadata associated with that. That's the exact same thing that's happening on the video front. It's just looking at what's on the screen and comparing that to a database of typically linear content and ads, but also OTT and whatever's really hitting the glass. From an audio perspective, there's two different flavors of it. So on the Inkscape side, we are embedded in the chipset and are owned by Vizio. So our audio detection is actually coming through the HDMI port. So it's not through a microphone or anything like that. It's actually not listening to anything that's happening in the room. There's not even that capability. So that's one form of audio. And then the second form of audio ACR is the mobile app or mobile SDK ACR, where it's leveraging a microphone when you're in a specific app to determine what's happening or what you're watching in the room.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's turn to Alex and Chris really quickly. When you guys are activating campaigns utilizing this type of data, are you looking for specific types of capabilities from your partners? And then what are those capabilities? Why don't you jump off, Chris?
Yeah, I think the primary thing for us is the source. What's available within the targeting. Does it include linear TV? Does it include streaming? Does it include on demand? What's the look back window? How large is the sample? And how much of the audience is modeled versus one-to-one targeting? Can we retarget off of ads, or is it just going off of title consumption? Are there viewing behavioral segments available, such as like bingers versus week over week watchers? Are there things that are less indicative about the title that they consume, but more so how they're consuming? And then can we use it for measurement? I think if we can use it for both targeting and for measurement, that makes everything a little bit more simple. One of the beautiful things about ACR is that they do have that endpoint conversion for us in terms of the tune-in, which for us is very difficult because at HBO we don't have a full view of our subscribers, and their content consumption is that's owned by the distributors. Right. So we're reliant on various partners to help us fill in the gaps of our own data, so that we can kind of hone in on HBO subscribers when it comes to getting people to watch the shows. Obviously, we do want to hit some prospects for upper funnel awareness, but for the main part, we want to hone in on people we actually can get to tune in, and then to suppress them from our acquisition campaigns, right? So like those are the two main use cases for us in terms of identifying subscribers, and ACR is a great source for that because you can actually see content consumption on a specific channel, get an idea of what their cable package looks like, and make some informed decisions about who you want to target.
Perfect. Thank you. Alex, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, that definitely all aligns. To add to that, when we're evaluating ACR data sets, we're really looking for a lot of things, but a few key things are the scale of the data, how granular and transparent are the segments, as well as the speed of the data. So we want to make sure the data is nationally representative. And we also, as a tune-in brand specifically, we want to make sure that the viewership trends that the data is seeing aligns with what the Nielsen panel is seeing, since the Nielsen rating is still our primary KPI. And then we have a lot of data of who's most likely to tune in. So we want to make sure that our ACR data partner can work with us on building a very granular segment. And there's a lot of transparency into the audience size, the modeling, to Chris's point, and that we are able to be really strategic with our targeting and build multiple segments and prioritize our audiences. And then for speed, this is important for certain segments. We want to make sure we can activate against the data quickly when we're retargeting people within a season. So if we're supporting a new show and someone tuned into season 1, we want to keep them coming back and kind of remind them of messaging, especially sometimes our shows change nights from Wednesdays to Tuesdays over the course of the season. So that's when it's really important to get that data quickly.
Perfect. That's
Rob,
great.
do you mind if I talk to that issue on the speed?
Absolutely, Ronan.
Because we didn't really go into it on other forms of TV viewing data beyond ACR, but there have been other data sets in market from set-top boxes for quite a while. One of the challenges with set-top box data is how long it takes for that data to get through to being actionable or fully measurable. It's very valuable in terms of scale. I mean, there's lots of set-top box data out there, but just the delay causes problems for a lot of the use cases that we and our partners come across, especially in terms of in-flight adaptation of a campaign or changing an audience or identifying who did tune in and then being able to adapt to that quickly. So ACR brings a real benefit in that case, that wasn't around 2 to 3 years ago.
That's great. No, thank you. And that leads us into a little bit of the next question as far as the quality of the data. And, is there I guess, 2 parts to the question. I'll throw it to Ronan and Ken first. Is there a standard ranking for the quality when it comes to ACR data, or, putting it in a different way, is there a such thing as bad ACR data? I mean, we've talked a little bit about what we want to see, and Chris and Alex, the perspective from the client side, but is there data out there that we should be avoiding as we learn about this category?
I don't think there's a standard rating. There's no industry standard, scoring system. But certainly anybody who's been using ACR data in a sophisticated fashion, including Alex and her team, have gone through very detailed RFIs, requests for information, understanding what is the underlying data, how is it collected, who's it collecting from, how often is it collected, where does it go to, all the whole value chain, the whole process chain as to where the data comes from. And they've made their independent evaluations on which data sets are good and which ones not so good. I'm not going to ask her to answer that on this call, but there's no standard industry kind of metric, but there should be, actually, in a sense. And maybe Ken can talk to this because he's more at the coalface of the data quality issues. We're obviously an aggregator. He represents the actual source of data, the television manufacturer. Ken, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah. So a point that I kind of alluded to earlier is that not all ACR is created equal, and there are unique benefits and cons to each set. So at Inscape, we believe that there's not one perfect data set out there in the marketplace. So anyone who tells you that there is likely not telling the truth. But a couple of things to note. So to Alex's point, speed, scale, transparency, representativeness are all key points that need to be looked at when evaluating ACR data. And it really comes down to, because there isn't a stack ranking, so at Inscape, we believe we have the gold standard in ACR data, right? But someone else also believes that, and we have our own opinions on that. But it comes down to education, so in asking the right questions. So around privacy, we know privacy is super important with CCPA coming out. Is the opt-in policy compliant with FTC guidelines? Does it give them permission to release IP address for the likes of retargeting and measurement? Is the data refreshed hourly? We know some partners actually aren't ingesting ads and retargeting off of actual ACR ad detections. They're using as run logs, which has its own inherent problems, similar to what Ronan said with set-top box, but that also happens in the ACR space too. And then getting down to transparency. So at Inscape, we provide a raw data to the marketplace in order for them to evaluate the efficacy of our data set and align to what we're putting in market. And we believe that's important for each partner to do and evaluate themselves internally.
No, that's great, Ken. And you actually bring up a great point. And this gives me an opportunity to insert one of the questions that was submitted to us by the audience before when they signed up an RSVP for this, and that is about CCPA. How are you guys, and I'll throw this out to all of you, from an evaluation standpoint and from a vendor standpoint, how does this data get affected by CCPA and privacy regulation, and what are you guys doing on that front?
So I can lead with that one, but it probably impacts us. It probably impacts us the most at Inscape. So privacy is a huge concern amongst all of our clients and amongst our organization as well. We are a consumer electronics company at the end of the day, so our consumer experience is paramount. That's the majority of our revenue, so we would never do anything to hinder that. So with CCPA coming out, it really just makes it super important that the vendor is getting that express opt-in consent, and that the consumer knows exactly what is happening with their data, where it's going, what potentially is being matched to, and how it's being used. So that's why we have a separate and distinct opt-in policy for ACR data collection that we believe should all OEMs should be leveraging in order to collect data in the right way.
Yeah,
great.
Actually, can I just touch on the IP address component of this? IP address is very important for leveraging smart TV ACR data, because smart TVs don't show up on ad exchanges. There's no mobile ad identifier or cookie. So you do need to leverage the IP address to map it into other devices in the household, so you can do that targeting and measurement across devices. And IP address will continue to be sort of viewed as a privacy sensitive issue. But when you've asked the consumer for permission, when you've said, listen, our TV has the ability to collect your viewing history anonymously. In order to do this, we do need to use the IP address. Can we get your permission to do this? And they say, yeah. And if the message is clear and the notification is clear and the opt-in is clear, then it's good. And the challenge that we've seen is some technologies not being very clear on the use of IP address. And we think that this is really going to be important moving forward in the market. The consumer needs to understand what that is, and it needs to understand what they've actually opted into, essentially. Informed opt-in.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. What about Chris? You want to jump in from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the definition of bad ACR data and good ACR data is such a tricky one, and we for a long time looked at it in terms of how are we sourcing the data, and I think there was a misnomer out in the industry of by consumers that ACR technology was listening to your conversations, retargeting you on your conversations. And, we all know, if we could be doing that, we 100% would be doing that. But if that was legal, it would be, it's a no-brainer. But, obviously that's not how the technology works. So it's making sure that the vendors we're working with are clear with their consumers on how they're collecting that data, making sure that they're doing so in a legal, but also an ethical way. And to make sure that from a brand perspective that we're being safe, and we obviously don't want to engage with someone that is collecting data in a non-ethical way, and luckily I think that there has been a shift in the conversation from necessarily audio being the number one source to it being more video on glass, which I think is just obviously more accurate, so that's helpful, but also it gives the opportunity for consumers to be a little bit more aware about what's going on behind the scenes when it comes to ACR.
Right.
Yeah. Actually, it's probably, when you're talking about quality of ACR data, Rob, it's probably worth mentioning that ACR has become a very sort of generic term that's actually being used in place of the word TV viewing data. And TV viewing data can come from all sorts of sources. So it's important to know that ACR is a very specific technology that collects TV viewing data in a very specific way, either by audio recognition or video recognition. But it's being used a lot to describe cable set-top box data, sometimes even television tuner data. That's where somebody's using a TV, the tuner on the actual television. The television's collecting the channel changes with the remote control. It's even being used to cover CTV viewing behaviors, like using over-the-top apps. And they're all a different hodgepodge of different consumer behaviors and content consumption. And from our perspective, and obviously from Dex's as well, there's just something really, really high quality about the way ACR collects the true viewing behavior on the screen. And it can collect it from over-the-top viewing, linear broadcast viewing, cable set-tops viewing. It can even collect things like video gameplay, which is amazing and really useful.
Right.
time shifted viewing, channel change events, true ad exposure events. It's just a very, very powerful technology. And it's important that when people are looking at it as a tool to activate or measure from, that they're getting the right one, not something that's generically being used as a term to describe a bunch of other technologies that are merged together.
That's a great point, Ronan. Thank you for sharing that. Alex, do you want to add a little bit on the privacy thing?
Yeah, I think it just goes down to transparency with the partners. Are they sharing the opt-in and opt-out process? Are they sharing how they're collecting their data, and just making sure you're running that through the right legal channels? It's really on them, but on us to ask the questions.
Absolutely. Great. So that brings us to our second poll question. Where does all this info fit within the data landscape? How does it all how does it all work, and what types of industries are utilizing this data? Some are more than others. Alex and Chris are here representing the entertainment industry, but we know that this data is being used across all different verticals. So poll question number 2 is, what verticals do the brands that you work on represent? So
you can only select one, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
It's not a multi-choice.
Well, entertainment in the early lead.
Oh yeah, that's easy.
It's popping down a little bit. Great. I mean, what we're seeing here is exactly what we thought, and that is, while entertainment is certainly a leading category in utilizing this type of data, it actually does run the gamut across the board, with luxury, food and bev, travel, a big one. Auto is obviously a big one as well. A number of different things will fall into other. But I think, this lends the question of, how should marketers use this type of data? Is it the only thing they should be using from a targeting standpoint? And what are some of the best use cases for brands to use this data? So Chris and Alex, I'll ask you guys to first talk about how you guys, with your respective brands and pieces of business that you work on, how do you leverage the data from a usage standpoint?
Yeah, I can start. For entertainment, what we've really found is that a user's past viewership is their best indicator for what their future viewership will be. So ACR is a really important part of our data strategy, since it does have that rich viewership data. It allows us to be really precise in our targeting and build exact segments. So an example of something we've done before is, if this show is a very late season, but we've seen a big drop off, we're able to look back at who those users are that dropped off and kind of re-message them and get them to tune into the next new season. So that's one strategy we've used. We also use it outside of just targeting based on TV content. We target users exposed to our TV campaign, and there are a few reasons. One is that in our studies across the board, what we've seen is when users are reached on both TV and digital, they're seeing the highest lifts in tune-in. So it's important to make sure we message them across platform. I know that's a little different than how other brands are doing it. They're really more, not entertainment, but other verticals are focused on unique reach from TV, and that's a little bit of the opposite of what we're doing. But ACR could help them there as well, because if you can understand who is exposed, you can understand who isn't exposed. And then last, a big part of our linear campaign is limited because we are competitive to the networks we're running on. So we're not able to, in our creative, say the day, date, and time it's running. So we are still running there because it's important to run on TV, but we can re-message people with digital and tell them it's premiering Tuesday at 9 p.m. because without that message, it's harder for them to know when to tune in. And then not as much relevant for entertainment, but I think something that a lot of verticals use it for is similar to how we're retargeting people exposed to our TV campaign. You can retarget people exposed to a competitor's TV campaign. So if you can't afford a big splashy spot, you could use the same thing we're doing to retarget users exposed to our spots to share additional messaging. You could do that to kind of share your own messaging against your competitive TV advertisers. And then outside of targeting, ACR just, it's really beneficial for our attribution. Like Chris mentioned earlier, it's actually our tune-in conversion, but for all verticals, it can help you understand cross-platform reach frequency. So whether you want to extend your reach or extend your frequency, that data helps you understand who you have and haven't reached.
No, that's great, Alex. Thank you. And great. Thank you for bringing up the conquesting part of it, because I think that's such an important one, especially when you may not have budgets as big as your competitor and you're trying to have the same type of message out there that they do. But with limited funds, you can really have the same share of person that they have with the spot they're running on TV in your digital message. So that's a really good one to bring up. What about you, Chris, on your end?
Yeah, I mean they're pretty similar. Sequential messaging, I think, is definitely a big one, and I think that is partially driven by, from an entertainment perspective, that like our beats in a campaign are driven by like what content we have to release. So typically it's teaser, trailer, and then you're working on more of a date time message closer to premiere. But there is some aspect of storytelling in that journey, right? Like the teaser is just giving you a small sampling. Trailer is really where we're able to get more of a message around like what the show is. But it's usually a 60-second ad. So how many people are making it to the end of a 60-second ad to see like the day time? We want to be able to follow up with something that gets that information in front of them a little bit more clearly. I think the main thing for us is being able to target content affinities and use signals that we don't have internally, right? Like we have some of our first party data in terms of like who's streaming or engaging with content within the HBO ecosystem, and we work with our sister companies as well. But there's a lot of our comp titles that we're saying like, okay, if you like this show, then you'll like our new show. Fall beyond our ecosystem, so we have to leverage ACR and other partners to target those audiences. Whereas on some other platforms, such as like a social, or many of the DSPs have like their interest in affinity targeting, it becomes a little less clear as to like what that actually means. Whereas ACR, it's crystal clear that like we're retargeting the people who viewed this content, not people who like tweeted, Zendaya killed me with that finale outro song or whatever. And it's like, who's to say what got you bucketed into that interest? This is just, ACR gives us a lot more clarity around who we're actually targeting. And I think that's like the main thing for us.
Oh, that's perfect. So that's a great look-see into what entertainment and TuneIn does. Ken or Ronan, do you guys either one of you guys have an example from one of the other categories or a different category that you could mention?
Well, I mean, auto, you brought it up in the poll there. Auto, big brand spenders on tier one national, but the local guys like to leverage and exploit the tier one investment by doing retargeting of the tier one national ads. They say, okay, I'm going to target a digital campaign to everybody who sees that national ad in my own vicinity and near my dealerships, because they're already primed. They've already been sold in a sense. So it really helps them to kind of just exploit that national investment. There's also another point that Alex brought up there about challenger brands. If you're a small and upcoming brand with a limited budget, it's actually really useful to exploit major brands who have very large TV budgets to your own benefit. You can basically retarget digital ads to people who've seen your dominant competitors' messaging. And you can do two things. You can either play off it in a playful kind of sarcastic kind of way, or you can counter it, or you can basically just piggyback it as well. And piggybacking works quite well, again, in the auto sector. So sometimes there's confusion amongst sort of more generic mid-size autos where people are like, what's the difference between a Toyota Corolla and a Ford, blah, 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 blah. I don't know the names. But it means that you can actually introduce a little bit of sort of confusion where there might be a little bit already as well. You can, okay, here's a group of people who've seen that TV commercial 3 times. They understand that there is a car in market. Let's show them our car. They're probably not going to remember that they're different cars because cars have become so generic in so many regards. And you can replay off that as well. So there's a bunch of different tactics that you can play on.
That's great. Perfect.
And I would add to that. So we see a lot of retargeting using ACR data because, one, it has the scale and the speed that marketers are looking for compared to some legacy data sets that are out there. So retargeting is definitely a big one, and that's primarily the speed up is primarily for sequential messaging or moving someone further down the funnel and trying to understand kind of how that works together. For instance, like in an Inscape perspective, we can deliver an ad exposure within 10 seconds to a partner for them to then retarget them or that household based on the device graph that they have. So it's definitely near real-time ability. But I'd say what we are also seeing from a brand perspective is this movement into attribution, measuring based on business outcomes. So ACR, a big advantage for ACR is that it does provide an IP address that's able to be matched to other sources of data, whether it be a brand's first-party data or third-party data that they're used to, like truck contenders or something like that from Polk. So creating a media plan, executing against that media plan, and then measuring against that media plan using one single source of data. We're starting to see a bigger movement towards that across the entire planning, buying, and measurement stage.
Yeah, no, that makes great sense. So one question, just jumping off of that, is what's the recommendation for ever-changing IP addresses? And this is actually a question from the audience. It just kind of segued perfect with what you just said. Some broadband companies are rotating IP addresses such that a single household can have dozens of IP addresses, resolving to a wide range of geos, maybe not potentially tying to an audience graph, especially, et cetera, within a single day. So have you guys talked about that from the vendor standpoint, this ever-changing IP address situation?
We've had to talk about it. You obviously have an engineer on the line there. The majority of households currently, the IP address is reasonably stable. I think the last time I looked at the report, 95% of them were stable across an entire month, which surprised us because we do know that a lot of ISPs do rotate out their IP address. The great thing about the smart TVs with the ACR tech is that as long as they're on, the TV is reporting back every second or half second or whatever. So if there is an IP address change, that reports back immediately. So it's basically, we're getting instantaneous data on that. Having that instantaneous data from the TV on what the household IP address is cool. But if all your data around mobile ad IDs or IDFAs or cookie IDs is now based on an expired IP address, it means, yes, your cross-device graph, I'm getting too technical here, so stop me if you want. It means a cross-device graph is going to start expiring. One of the great things about having access to IP address is being able to target on an IP address basis still in the USA. I'm saying that specifically because in Europe, they're getting rid of that, but in the USA, you can do that. So we have opt-in from the consumer to use the IP address for targeting and measurement, and we have the technology to be able to target digital media based on IP address as well. So we can actually keep up with those rotations without having to rely on the delays or the aging of a cross-device graph. You asked.
Yes, no, I think that's great. So Ken, looking forward a little bit here, what does the future hold for ACR? And I'm going to bridge that in this sense. It seems as though 2020 has started to begin this impending cookie apocalypse. And so how's ACR data prepared for this? And what are some of the steps you guys are taking to make sure that ACR data in the future is as important as it is right now? Yeah.
So the future of ACR, it's a little question, but I think we are excited about the future of ACR in the sense that, one, we're on this webinar right now and it's being talked about more and more frequently. We also believe with the current climate that all of our companies are facing today with the COVID-19 pandemic, people are really taking a step back to reevaluate their investments in legacy data sets and currencies and trying to really pivot into what their brands have been asking for, but also into a more economical model based on outcomes and not broad based measurement tactics per se. Mm-hmm. So I think from the cookie apocalypse, we are primarily, that really doesn't impact us per se at all because we are totally based on IP address. So we are not worried about the cookie apocalypse. But I will say we are worried about privacy and how the laws will be changing over time. So we continue to keep a pulse check on that. We have a whole team dedicated to privacy in the US to keep us up to speed on everything that's happening so we can also inform our clients. So I'd say that's probably our number one focus in regards to that.
No, that's great. And I'll throw this to Ronan too. I mean, I think that's a great point, Ken, and I believe Ronan will probably make the same one, is that you guys aren't relying on the cookies and that everything is IP address focused. And that's something for the audience here to make sure that they understand, because that's a huge differentiator with this data and how you can use it.
Yeah, I mean, let's not get it wrong. We do leverage cookie and mobile ad IDs as well to maximize the reach of the data. But when faced with the cookie apocalypse, and I sure am going to miss cookies, it does encroach into our territory. And this isn't just for 8 people working in the TV data business. This is the whole industry. The whole industry is facing an existential problem here. And there's two ways it goes. Either the cookie gets replaced with a device identifier, and obviously smartphones have a device identifier already, but browsers within the smartphones don't yet. They could have, but they haven't. But there's also a risk that the Google, Apple FANGs decide to get rid of device identifiers as well, under the same philosophy of consumer privacy and personal data protection. If that's the future, if there's going to be no device identifiers, it's going to make it very hard to target based on individual or personal data. And the IP address still does stand as an identifier that can be used, but it's so sensitive, you've got to have a robust consumer opt-in to allow you to use that. Mm-hmm. Really robust, not just sort of, you can opt out anytime. You got to get them to opt in. Google, in their own cookie apocalypse notification, have introduced this concept of the, I'm trying to remember the name now, the IP wallet or something like that, or IP credit, where they're trying to bring in a system where the use of the IP address will actually consume tokens or credits. So there'll be an economic cost to doing it. And we're not too sure if they're actually going to be able to implement that effectively on a global basis. So we're kind of saying, right now, IP address data is good when it's opted in. We can still play with cookies and mobile ad IDs. If the 10 years down the road, they're gone, they're history, we still have a solution as long as IP4 is still implemented. I'm not going to get too technical on you again there.
Yeah. Great. So flipping to both Alex and Chris here, what do you guys think about as far as when you hear about the future of this technology? Do you guys feel like there's untapped opportunities as you brainstorm internally and talk about utilizing this data to have successful campaigns on your end? What are the untapped opportunities with ACR, and what does this tech have to offer your brands that you guys talk about, or even something you hope for it to offer that it may not offer yet?
Yeah, I think kind of the untapped opportunities for me, it very much the future state. And as we think about how we deal with the loss of cookies and all that, is being able to get ACR data down to the individual level. I think that is crucial to the evolution of ACR going forward. The IP, you're looking at a household level. And we want to be able to get down to an individual level in terms of viewership for targeting and also for measurement, because I can tell you right now, I'm not watching the same thing my parents are. Exactly. They're right downstairs right now watching probably Ozark or something like that. And so I think is the number one thing that we are hoping for in the future of ACR. I also think it could, from a just kind of projecting here, is that that could help to solve for the identity crisis that we're facing here. And that I think that, if you give the consumers a little bit more ownership and the ability to opt into something like that, consumers at some point are going to have to understand that the services they use for free are supported by ads, and you're going to get an ad regardless. You might as well opt into things that are keeping your data private, but also allowing for you to have the most personalized experiences on these platforms. I don't need ads for balding medication anymore. Need it for a lot of other things, but not that. So getting it down to the individual so we can kind of just get more precise, I think is the key.
Yeah, is that something that on the vendor side you guys are evaluating, looking into, researching, or what are the thoughts on how far out something like that might be?
I think from an Inscape perspective, we are aware that the data is in person level and it's at a household level, and our hope is that to the ecosystem to create a currency that's going. We partner comes to the table with a panel or something that can supplement the data and then create person level insight. But at this time, I should say.
Yeah, Ken, you're breaking up a little for me, but on my end, we've seen that partners are starting to map ACR data to other data sets to learn more about it, but it's primarily in the attribution space. So to Chris's point, using that for targeting would be wonderful. And then also, I think another big opportunity is that because ACR can see more than just linear, and it can see cross-platform viewership, really understanding those trends, kind of who is watching where, if people are watching in both platforms, what makes them watch in one place versus another, and really getting a better holistic view of TV viewership.
Yeah.
And I think another thing, Ronan mentioned this slightly, but it is, everyone thinks of ACR as TV data, and of course most of what you're doing on your TV is watching TV, but there's a lot more that happens on the TV, to Ronan's point, like video games, and kind of what else can we fingerprint that's happening on the TV to use for targeting. For entertainment, it will, you know, TV is going to be our primary, but I think there are more use cases. If you're going after a gamer, like targeting people that are playing video games, and so on.
Marrying it to podcasts would be fantastic. Getting some podcast measurement, you know, I mean, we all know that that's a challenge. You know, maybe bringing in some of the audio recognition could be useful there.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Rob, do you mind if I
Ron,
talk
jump
to a
in.
couple of these issues?
Absolutely.
First, I want to talk to what Alex was saying about over-the-top viewing. This has really kind of exploded in the last half year in terms of interest from marketers to understand consumer behavior changes, especially in the last month and a half. I mean, COVID has obviously changed all of our behaviors, but the change in viewing behaviors is quite notable, and people want to understand how to measure that. And the great thing about this video ACR tech is that it has the ability to differentiate between different types of viewing content. A big shout out to the Vizio Inscape team, because something that they launched last fall was something we call source attribution capability, where every viewing event, every show tune-in event, or every ad exposure event comes with an indication of what device was actually being viewed through. So if the set-top box was enabled at the time of the viewing, it will tell us that it was an Xfinity set-top box. If it was a Hulu device, or not Hulu, an Amazon Fire Stick, it'll tell us it was an Amazon Fire Stick. And that's really, really powerful stuff for being able to profile and analyze consumer viewing behaviors and patterns. Very useful for entertainment marketers, our team here on the call today, but also useful for just understanding general consumer psychographics. And one of the things that we didn't really talk about when you asked the question about sort of non-entertainment brands and how they're leveraging this data, traditional CPGs are using this viewing behavior to profile their existing consumers for the purpose of prospecting new potential customers. So you can imagine, we'll go back to the Ford motor company example. They might have a database of people who've shown an interest in the upcoming model. We can onboard that first-party data set, profile the viewing behaviors of that high propensity to convert consumer, then look at the viewing behaviors of the 20 million households that we're able to monitor their viewing by opt-in. And then we can build out a profile of what kind of clusters of psychographic profiles these people break into. What kind of probability do they have of matching? What kind of similarity index do they have? And this is really useful stuff. And it might sound familiar to anybody who's on the call today from a digital marketing perspective, because it's very similar to traditional lookalike modeling and indexing. The difference is we're using TV entertainment, TV content viewing behaviors to build the model. And what's really powerful about that is what you select to spend your time watching in front of the TV is a much stronger indicator of who you are than what you spend your time on the internet doing, believe it or not. Yeah. So we're able to build very solid models for identifying prospects for consumer brands to actually go after and convert, essentially. And that's all down to ACR tech. That's the foundation.
Yeah, that's great. Perfect. So that's a good segue into this, into our last question, also our last poll question. We're obviously in an unprecedented time right now, and seeing, you know, a ton of things we've never seen before going on in our world. And advertiser perceptions is saying that over 90% of advertisers' budgets have seen some sort of change since March. So the next poll question is, have you adjusted your advertising budgets as a result of the COVID-19 scenario that we're in right now? And obviously the audience here is in line with advertising perceptions, even more so.
I think the only company that's increased their advertising spend is Zoom Video.
Yeah, right. It is crazy. So the question I'll throw to you guys as this poll is going, so 97%, so even higher, is how do you guys see ACR data adding more value to advertisers' budgets and what they're doing right now than maybe ever before in you know, just comparing it to the situation that we're all in, being home, and obviously TV viewership being what it is right now? And I'll go round robin with that one for you guys to all add a perspective.
Sure, I'll kick it off. Yeah, I mean, in terms of like consumption, it's, you know, obviously had a huge impact. Everybody is basically locked at home and has nothing to do but watch TV. I think ACR right now is giving us the ability to, you know, take advantage of the real-time trends. It does feel like people are churning through content so quickly that, you know, Tiger King was hot last week, and then the next week it'll be the next thing, and, you know, hopefully it'll be one of our things. But you know, it does feel like right now, in terms of content consumption, everything feels more emotional, like what you are emotionally, you know, ready to consume. You know, for me, I'm binging comedies and cooking stuff and all that. My parents, you know, if it doesn't involve drug cartels and murder, they're not into it. Some people like only want to be watching stuff that they're familiar with, right? They want like that comfort food type of consumption. And then some people like want to be keeping up with the latest in news and kind of what's going on out there. ACR gives us the ability to tap into that in real time, and you know, make adjustments in real time. And I think from our perspective, we had to make a lot of adjustments in terms of where our investments were, because, you know, sports, we had to completely shift everything to make up for, you know, where we're lacking in sports coverage now. It just gives us the ability to make those pivots a little bit quicker and with a little bit more information behind it, rather than kind of going on hunch.
That's great. Thanks, Dex. Alex, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I would say that covers a lot of it with like getting the speed of how viewership change is happening. There's more TV consumption than ever, which is just adding more data. But another thing that's really important, that like when you have limited budgets, is really understanding reaching the right audience and understanding your reach and frequency against that audience, which ACR can really help with. So for some advertisers, they want to be very careful about not hitting a certain amount of frequency because, you know, you're paying for every frequency. So if you have a tight budget, maximizing reach, you know, but either way, ACR data just helps you measure your reach frequency cross platform and could help you, you know, be smarter with the limited funds.
Great. You want to jump in, Ken?
Yeah, I think to Alex's point, that's exactly right. What we're seeing now is a lot of conquesting activity from a measurement perspective, tying together all of their marketing tactics into one, and doing that holistic view of what's happening across all of their marketing, specifically with ACR and TV, being able to see cross-platform what's happening on OTT, linear, and connected TV, and being that unifying source. I think we're going to continue to see a much bigger importance on that factor, especially during this crisis, as budgets are getting cut and people are really refocusing on what they've invested in from a measurement perspective.
Can I elaborate a little bit on?
Anything to add to that, Rowan?
Yeah. If you think of 2020, it started off as being the year for the golden age, part 2 of TV. I mean, the number of subscription or advertiser paid video on demand services, Peacock's are coming, Disney Plus came, HBO Max, HBO Max. I mean, there's Netflix, Hulu. I mean, there's just so many options, and there's so much great content happening, even beyond Ozark. You can let your parents know about that. So you had this, you know, influx of what I would call walled garden content consumption. Essentially, it's the TV equivalent of what happened with Facebook and Snap and other walled gardens. And then you get hit with a pandemic that has everybody at home with, you know, nothing to do and no sports on TV, and yes, 6 o'clock news, but they don't want to be watching news for hours and hours on end. It's just too depressing. So suddenly they have all this content available to them, and they're spending their time watching it. And, you know, streaming has just exploded. And this behavior may never go back. I mean, people may learn a new behavior, and it may be very difficult for traditional linear TV, cable TV, to kind of win these people back, because they're going to get used to on demand and big search of catalogs that they can dive into. But what's important is advertisers dealing with that, because the advertisers had already been, certainly TV advertisers, already been seeing an erosion of the reach power of traditional linear television. And we're already looking for solutions in CTV, connected TV advertising through through OTT services and these streaming services. But if a significant portion of the content consumption is happening in environments where there is no advertising, Netflix, hello, Disney Plus, hello, how do they translate that to environments where they actually can get images or videos in front of consumers to tell them their message? And this is really where ACR TV data comes into its own, is being able to identify the behind the walls patterns of viewing behaviors, not all of it, but a lot of it, enough so you can actually identify where people are going when they're coming out of the walled gardens into linear, and making sure your advertiser gets those spots because he's seeing the right consumers behaving in a way inside the walled gardens that he wants to try and get his message in front of them outside the walled gardens. And then you can carry that across digital with all the retargeting tactics we've talked about. Right. But it's an increasing problem.
Yeah, it is. No, that's a great way to sum it up. Well, that ends the official part of the questions and the information that we were going to have you guys share. There are a couple of questions from the audience, so we have a few more minutes. So I'll jump into a couple of these, and there's some really interesting ones. The first one I'm going to address to Chris and Alex is, how are buyers and media companies evaluating the ROI on the investment in ACR? What they can get from ACR versus what they can already get from their legacy TV viewership data?
Yeah, I think it's all about the tactic, the goal, and what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, various parts of each of our campaigns have got different goals. Right? Awareness is usually up front, and then you're trying to drive actual tune-ins later on. Or if it's like a brand campaign, you're obviously trying to drive favorability and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think when we look at ACR, it because we are able to get to that tune-in event, we are able to track our tune-in rates and our cost per incremental tune-in, because you do want to have a control group there to see who was going to tune in anyway. That is possible within most of our ACR partners. That is not possible within a lot of our other partners, and particularly not possible in real time.
Right.
A lot of those studies take months post premiere to get back. We're fortunate that this technology allows us to be a little bit quicker there, and to get some benchmarks in terms of those metrics a little bit earlier in our campaign.
No, that makes sense. Alex, you want to address that one?
Yeah, just to build on that, with attribution using ACR, it also allows us typically to get very granular in the cuts we're seeing. So measuring that tune-in lift and cost per tune-in that Chris was referencing, but at the data set level. So you could really understand what data set is driving the most efficient cost per tune-in, because there are a lot of pros about ACR about how granular you can get. You can reach the exact audience, but there are costs associated with data. So that allows us to kind of evaluate the ACR data versus traditional data sets at an efficiency tune-in, to driving efficiency tune-in.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And Chris, just to build off something you just said, one additional thing on there is, you talked about real-time targeting. When do you guys, I guess the question would be, when do you guys evaluate, or how important is the real-time targeting based on the ACR data versus using the data for a longer term retargeting strategy? Do you use both? Which one's more important to you? Is it the immediacy of having that message be seen, or sometimes is it better to hit that person a day or two later when they haven't been thinking about it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And it really depends on the use case, right? Like if you're really trying to do that sequential messaging and you want it to be in more real time, you obviously you want it to be closer to real time. But like for a lot of our stuff, there is no new content to provide after a certain beat for a little while. So like we drop a teaser and sometimes 6 or more weeks until any new content is available. And you don't want to follow up. Everybody hates the ads that you see a million times and all of a sudden that ad. And it feels like it's just kind of stalking you around. There is a place for that a little bit in terms of like you want the immediacy of like getting day time in front of people, but we leverage it more for longer term retargeting for our own media. And then when we're using it for content consumption and content affinities, timing is not nearly as important to us. Like if you are a fan of crime genres but you haven't consumed one this week, we're okay with that. Particularly, and I think we're seeing even more with the quarantine, is that like appointment TV is not really as much of a thing as it was even 2-3 years ago. People watch when they want to watch, and we want to get message in front of them whenever is like they are ready to find that next show. So we're not necessarily worried about like when you watched, Big Bang Theory. It's more, are you a Big Bang Theory fan?
Yeah, right. What about
I
you,
would agree.
Alex?
There's
Yeah.
a use case for both. Most of our targeting is really based on past viewership, which uses more of that long term, and where it's really important to understand the look back window of the data, because shows are seasonal. So a show may have premiered a year ago, and if you watched it and we're releasing a similar show, it's still important to target you, even if it was a year ago. So we really need to understand how far back that data can go. But then real time has its benefits when we're messaging people exposed to our TV campaign, or even sometimes as a last minute tune in driver. If we know someone's at home watching TV and maybe watching a competitive network, serving them an ad to tune in to our new show premiering that night right before is definitely another tactic. But I would say, similar to Chris's point, a majority of it's based on that longer term viewership, since it's more important to find the exact audience.
Yeah.
And when we do the longer term viewership audiences, one of the things that we've encouraged our teams on is that like we'd like to do a 2+ qualifier for the content that makes you fall into that bucket, right? Because just showing an affinity for one of a set of 10 shows can be a little misleading, right? Like, I used to be roped into watching The Bachelor with my ex. I no longer have to do that. So like, if I only have one reality show in my viewership history, don't target me for a reality show, because I no longer have to watch that. Yeah. It's those things where it's like it can change the composition of the audience that you're targeting based on the strategy that you're trying to execute on.
Yeah, perfect. All right, we have time for one more. I'm going to give this one to Ronan and Ken. More of a tech question. So, the different types of ACR tech, is there a consensus on which type of content recognition technology has the highest or lowest accuracy of content identification? And what are the other factors that impact the fidelity of that content identification?
That's definitely a tech question.
Ken,
if you have a good answer, go for it now, because I'm going to be using some slightly out of date information to answer that question.
That's a tech question, I would say. I would just say in general, there are differences. Obviously, we don't have the ability to go under the hood with every ACR provider, so we can only speak to ourselves and how we coach our clients through the accuracy of our data. But Ronan, since you deal with a few other providers, you might be able.
Yeah. Generally, and again, we don't get to see the full code base of the ACR techs that we're leveraging. But generally, the way the ACR works is it samples the content and it builds up a probability of accuracy against a catalog. The larger the catalog of known content, the more time it needs to find a point of 100%. I know this piece of content, it's definitely that piece of content. So traditionally, different ACR toolkits would have a different length of time requirement to get a 100% confidence detection. And things like dark scenes in a film or a movie cause problems. It's like, it's dark. There's lots of pieces of dark scenery in lots of movies. So how do I know which movie this is? And it'll wait and wait and wait until it goes, okay, now I know what this is, because it's different from all these other pieces of dark content. Right. So the fidelity with which an ACR tech can do that is important. Have we gone through a detailed analysis of our partners' methodologies? No. Do we know that they're hitting it with 100% accuracy? Yeah. Do we know where the weak points are? Yeah. Some ACR techs have a problem with very white backgrounds. So sometimes a TV commercial will have a white background with an animation going on it, and they have difficulty recognizing that content. What's cool, and I'll give kudos to Vizio again, is that they've just introduced audio recognition. When you combine audio recognition with the video recognition, you can get over those kind of weaknesses in any system. So
yeah,
well
that's
done,
great.
guys.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, team, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time you guys gave us today, the expertise that you have from a lot of different perspectives on this technology. I'm sure our audience really appreciated the insights that you provided, and hopefully it gives them some good nuggets to go back to their teams with and discuss. Secondarily, want to thank all of you who joined us today for our first rendition of Undertone Anywhere. We really appreciate the time that you guys gave us on this Wednesday afternoon, and we look forward to bringing you another topic sometime soon, and sharing that insight and those great learnings with you. So thanks so much.
Thanks all.